Hello, Dr. Hargreaves, and I'm very thankful for your time and for allowing us to discuss the topic of resilience in education systems, which is a leading conceptual framework of our college. You recently wrote a book together with Dennis Shirley about well-being in schools.
Yeah.
And, in your book, in this book, you argued that well-being is no longer at the back of the school bus, but rather in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
So how do you see the relationship between well-being, which you wrote about, and the student resilience? Do you see any connection?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. First of all, I just want to say to you and to everybody who's watching this, I'm speaking from Ottawa in Canada, on the land of the Algonquin people, the traditional lands of the Algonquin people. You can see we're speaking in winter behind me here. It's not cold all the year here in Canada, but wherever you are, welcome to this conversation. Dennis Shirley and I have actually, we worked with 10 school districts over 7 years or more, actually, in Canada, and also with 5 states in the US. And out of that have come 3 books that are related. One is on identity, which is our next one. The latest one is on well-being, and the one before that is on engagement. And they're all really connected to what you would think of as, or many people would think of as being resilience. There is, everybody talks about, there is a global mental health crisis among adults as well as amongst young people. Young people are feeling safer in many countries in day-to-day life and in-person life. Alcoholism, drug taking, things of this kind of going down, but they're feeling more anxious, more depressed, particularly in their digital lives, worried about how they look, what people think of them, very concerned about the state of the world, about war, about conflict, about climate change. All these are issues in Israel as much as they are everywhere else. And this permeates into their lives and into the schools. So we really face 2 kinds of questions with well-being. One is the individual question, really positive psychology. How can we help young people to be resilient, to bounce back, which is the literal meaning of resiliere, to come back from all the things that are pressing them down, really, from the outside. And the other thing which we talk a lot about in the book, which is not either or, it's both and, how can schools help people understand, deal with, feel they have a voice in the world, that things like war and climate change and threats to democracy are not hopeless, but that their education and their becoming as adults can do something about this. And how can the school also do something about its own environment, the things that create ill-being in the school, lack of choice, lack of autonomy, perhaps rigid forms of discipline, not so much in Israel, but elsewhere, too much testing, too much pressure on competition. So resilience and well-being help us think about 3 things: how to help individuals respond, and we can talk a bit more about that, how to change the school environment, and how through the curriculum to change the school and the young people's relationship to the environment in the world around them.
Thank you. So in your eyes, what do you think teachers should do to promote their student resilience? You mentioned the testing, you mentioned, but what do you think what can teachers do to contribute to student resilience?
Well, the first thing about well-being is remove the sources of ill-being. That's like the first place to go. If there is too much emphasis on testing, start thinking about how we deal with that. If the curriculum and the teaching is not helping young people thrive, if they see it as a boring, disengaging, not relevant, not connected, start attending to the curriculum. Make it have all the things that Martin Seligman talked about with his PERMA framework, that it has purpose, it has engagement, it builds relationships, it has meaning, and it gives a sense of accomplishment. So remove first of all, just remove the things that cause ill-being, then build young people's capacity to be able to respond to all the things that affect them. We're all affected by pressures a lot now, but in all life, everywhere. I grew up I talk about in my memoir, Moving, about growing up in a working class community in the north of England. Many people tell me I'm resilient. Some people tell me it's a bit annoying sometimes, but when I face difficulties, as I did in my childhood and adolescence, like other people, what do you need? You need a sense of belonging with other people, feel like you're not facing the difficulties that confront you on your own. So one of the most important things in a school is to build senses of belonging in a diverse community with different populations, to help our LGBTQ students, for example, feel more included. They're one of the most vulnerable groups for bullying, for feeling vulnerable within school. But and it's all kinds of things. Kids who are seen as too fat, kids who are seen as too short, kids who are seen as too shy. We don't always have a clear category for this, but really finding where young people's strengths are, their contributions, and building a sense of belonging. And I think something that the special needs community has really been a leader on is developing in young people a sense of self-advocacy. So self-advocacy is being, if you have a disability or a struggle, it may be legally or psychologically identified. It may not be formally identified, but first of all, developing an awareness of what that is. The school can help you. If you have a disability, intellectual, ADHD, Asperger's, whatever it might be, actually learning about your disability, understanding it's not only a weakness, but it also has sources of strength and contribution. Perhaps learning about accomplished people in politics, in Hollywood, who have your disability but are highly accomplished, and then learning the skills to be able to advocate with all your teachers for the conditions you need to help you learn best. You need a quiet space, not a noisy space. It's easier to be in this kind of environment rather than that kind of environment. You might need to be able to get up and move around more rather than have to sit still all the time. And we tend to rely on the adults to make these kinds of changes and improvements. But if we are all aware, including me, I have adult ADHD, diagnosed probably 15 years ago, and it has helped me enormously begin to tell people in a meeting, if you want me to run this meeting well for you, help me to help you. I can't organize my papers. They fall into disarray within minutes. So I have ministers of state who will sit next to me and organize my papers for me sometimes. And that means I can focus on the things I do well to lead the group in front of me. So I can be at my best to help them be at their best. And this is something we can learn from 5 years old. We don't have to wait until we're 55 years old to be able to do that.
Okay, very interesting. Do you think the pandemic changed the way we see student well-being and student resilience? Do you think resilience is handled today differently?
So, thank you for that. And I mean, the short answer is yes. In 2020, I was part of a Royal Commission in Canada on COVID-19 and schools. Not just me, but a whole group of scholars from different areas in psychiatry, psychology, early childhood, adolescence. It was clear from all the data we had in Canada and elsewhere that one of the areas that the pandemic really brought to the surface was mental health and well-being. And related to that, engagement with school. And it drew our attention to, first of all, obviously, how the pandemic had affected negatively both children's and teachers' well-being, and principals, actually. Not all of them. So some children did better. Children who were bullied in school weren't bullied in school anymore. Some kids who needed a bit more physical movement could have that. Some kids who were already very self-directed could find the digital environment quite helpful. But the truth is, they're in the minority. They more often come from privilege rather than poor or marginalized families. So for most people, clearly the data is overwhelming. The effect is negative. The young people most affected were teenagers because they're separated from in-person relationships. When we go to school, we don't just learn science, maths, or generic skills, whether they're literacy or other things, but we also learn who we are. We learn what we're becoming. We learn what we want to be part of, what our purpose is in life, and all that was taken away from young people during the pandemic. And therefore, I wonder sometimes if we've got over-enthusiastic about the importance of digital learning or at-home learning through and beyond the pandemic, because for young people, for all young people, of every age, education is about how we develop as people, as human beings, how we live in a democracy, how we build a sense of responsibility, personal and collective. And so this really put well-being high on the agenda. My worry, which is in the book with Dennis Shirley, is that many people have come to understand that the relationship between well-being and learning is that well-being creates the condition for learning, but it also works in the other direction. If you want well-being, it's important that you get up every morning and you look forward to going to school, because there you'll be with your friends, you'll have a teacher who's interested in you, you'll learn things that are new, and you'll develop confidence and competence in accomplishing things that you haven't accomplished before, you didn't even believe you could accomplish. So it's extremely important to say that well-being is not replacing learning or even supporting learning, but the well-being and learning go together. We want good learning as well as good well-being.
You mentioned teacher resilience. To what extent is resilience of teachers important, and why?
So one of the chapters not in our well-being book is a chapter on teacher well-being. We wrote it, but the organization, the group that publishes our book, distributes it to 11,000 leaders in the mail. So it matters how heavy the book is. and so we had to take a chapter out. And the chapter we took out is a chapter, unfortunately, on educators' well-being, teachers and school leaders. But we have published that in a paper. If you go to my website, and you can find out where that is. on the sustainability and non-sustainability of teachers' well-being. And 4 things seem to be particularly important, not just during the pandemic, when we know that the impact on teachers was so severe. Sometimes they felt they were not able to be, when they were teaching online, the people they wanted to be. They felt failures at their jobs. It's an awful feeling when you have a great commitment and passion, and you feel you're incompetent because of no fault of your own. And the 4 things we talk about are, first of all, having a sense of purpose, that you're teaching things you believe in. So sometimes the testing leads people to have to teach things they don't believe in, and that can have a very negative effect on well-being. So, and a sense that you're accomplishing your purposes, that your students are learning. They're learning because of you in a way, and you can see the impact, and a sense that you're focused on your purposes, which really is an important issue for the leadership, so that too many things aren't thrown at you at the same time, so you become scattered and you're not really feeling you're achieving anything. So purpose is important. Sense of autonomy. That I don't mean complete autonomy. You can teach what you like, even if somebody else taught it to you last year. But this is more collective autonomy rather than individual autonomy. But together, teachers have a lot of control over what is the best curriculum and the best teaching for the children they know well. They don't feel micromanaged from the outside, that they're working in an inflexible framework. So autonomy is not licensed to do anything, but professional autonomy, very important. The third is relationships. So you have well-being when you're working in good collegial relationships. The date on this is really clear, which we have a global crisis of teacher recruitment and retention now. You're more likely to stay in your school and to stay in teaching if you work in an environment that's collaborative, where you feel well supported, where you feel you're not just the new one who knows nothing, but everybody finds this work interesting, but difficult and challenging. So a really good collaborative environment amongst the adults in a school is important. And the last thing is energy. That you feel you're working in an environment that doesn't deplete your energy with just lots of negative work that burn you out and run you down. But like wind or solar power, we're renewing our energy. And how do you renew your energy? You renew it again through having a sense of purpose, good relationships, seeing the impact of your work, and feeling that quite a lot of your work is more like play than it is like drudgery. That it's creative, it's interesting. Sometimes, like everybody else, I have things I don't like to do as well as things I do. I have meetings, I have administration. We all have this, and if there's too much of it for me, the immediate thing you want to do is less work. You want to go take a walk or do something else. One response I take is to do different work. So I'll actually leave aside all the administration, and I'll do some writing, for example, which for me is an act of creativity. So the answer to too much bad work is not less work or no work. There's never been a workload study that said we needed more workload. It's not just about the quantity of the work, it's about how the work feels. And again, that's very important for all of us, but it's also important for our leaders.
So you mentioned, you noted 4 factors or 4 elements. Are they relevant for school principals too, for school leaders?
Well, again, during the pandemic, school leaders were, we tended to talk about a lot about the teachers, but the data on the leaders from many countries, I'm sure in Israel also, is every day they were facing things they'd never encountered before. Every day, making decisions that could be life and death without any confidence about the science, which was helpful but uncertain. And so what tended everywhere, the stress was almost unbearable sometimes. One thing we learned during the pandemic is the countries where leaders felt better were countries where at the very top there were collaborative solutions to dealing with the pandemic. So this was where I could name several countries. I worked with some of them with their ministers, and but I give you Scotland as one example, Ireland as another example. Some of our provinces, but not all of them, in Canada, and here you'd have politicians, health professionals, leaders of the teacher unions, leaders of the principals associations, student leaders, people from parents and communities, meeting on a weekly basis I've been part of some of these groups, to figure out just what to do next in this. It's like a war, really, where there's a new front opening, a new attack every day. And this collective response, everybody understood that there was no certainty, and if there were mistakes, there were mistakes. There were mistakes around assessment. There were mistakes around masks and closing schools and opening schools. But they were everybody's mistakes. They weren't just my mistakes. And people felt they were working in an environment where they didn't open their email, and there were just random announcements coming at them from politicians who were really kind of making all the decisions by themselves. So what can we learn from this? We can learn that it's not just important for principals to create a collaborative environment for the teachers, but principals need a collaborative environment too. We're doing a study in Nova Scotia, province in Canada, just under 1 million people. It's a developmental evaluation, so we're working with them and constantly feeding our results back. And they're trying to implement inclusion not just of special needs, but of people from various minority marginalized groups. And the 2 things that most predict successful implementation are the second highest predictor is collaboration in the schools, how well a principal creates a collaborative environment in their school. The highest predictor is how well principals collaborate with other principals and with other schools, because inclusions are very complex, quite difficult. It's really hard to create the right conditions. People kind of know what to do, but they find it hard to do it. And so that's when, reading 10 more papers won't provide you with the solution, but figuring out together what the practical answers are, and having that collaborative environment at the policy level is important too. So there's really something very important we've learned, lots of things we've learned from COVID, about assessment, about collaboration, about that change can be quick, it doesn't have to be slow. We can learn from and take into our post-COVID lives now.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for taking the time to participate in this interview. And thank you for such a remarkable contribution. Thank you.
Very welcome.